What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and this is a video about Path of Exile, and specifically the changes to the gems coming in patch 3.15. For those of you who know me from League of Legends, I'm going to be doing the same stuff I do with League, but for Path of Exile here, because I think it's really interesting. For those of you who don't know me from League of Legends, basically I like to do math on large sets of changes, and I use that, and very basic math, like it's just really basic stuff using Google Sheets, but it gives me a better handle on what exactly is happening with the game, and I tend to like sharing that with everyone else, so let's actually break down patch 3.15 by the numbers. As you can see on the screen right now, this is some quick math that I did for a Viper Strike build that I was considering doing for the league start. And basically, quick rundown here is, of course, the support gems of Deadly Ailments, Vile Toxins, and Swift Affliction all got nerfed. And if we're going to assume that the Swift Affliction duration nerf changing from 15% reduced to 25% less is going to be, in fact, the 25% less damage multiplier, roughly that's true. Then okay, we can do some math on like what does our clear look like, because if we're running multi-strike and various AoE stuff, then we can say, okay, well, we do 65% less DPS with poison with these changes. With these three things getting nerfed, we're doing 35% less DPS, 65% of the total DPS. But if they actually don't die quickly, if we don't get a lot of poison duration, then we're actually doing half damage. We're doing half the DPS before. That's a really, really big deal. But in the case of Viper Strike, poison's getting a 50% more damage buff across the board. So, okay, without durations of basically the same ability. So Viper Strike's like overall clear is down 2%, which right? It doesn't matter for white mobs because you don't care about the max poison duration against them anyway, so it's actually the same clear. If they are going to take longer, like you're not going to switch your links around, then you're going to fight a rare or something, then okay, you are doing 27% less Viper Strike damage. This, of course, can matter. Okay, great. When we sub in for melee physical and we sub in multi-strike, both of which more or less, got 10% less damage, then suddenly going for a full 6-link damage setup goes from 35% less to 48% less, and we only do half the boss damage. But wait, there's more, because Swift Affliction, of course, has reduced duration thing going on, reduced becoming less duration, which is multiplicative. So our boss DPS is actually 40%. Okay, wait, 50% global poison damage. Our real boss DPS damage is, right, like Chris Wilson said, it is 60% of what it was before, right? If you're going to just sub in Viper Strike, or really any poison build that's going to use melee phys, multi-strike, and all this stuff, you're indeed going to have yourself 60% of the damage you had before. So that still remains true functionally. Some really quick stuff with spell totems, that's not really important right now. Okay, but the thing you really care about is, but that's basically the example case, right? This is how we're doing the math, which we're just kind of multiplying everything together. Those who don't play a lot of Path of Exile, gems are almost always fully multiplicative with one another, and you tend to get up to 6 gems or 5 supports affecting the thing that's going on. Okay, but here's why we're really here, which is a big data table of actually how much damage did the game change. So first off, the base damages of abilities, the ones that got buffed, almost ubiquitously got buffed by exactly 25%. Certainly, there are abilities like Blade Vortex that didn't get any of that. Essence Drain and Contagion didn't get any of that. But for anything that was like relatively underused, like Blade Storm and Chain Hook and everything else, got a full 25%, just more damage, bam, on the skill gem itself. For abilities that were somewhat used, like Cyclone, they only got 10%. As they said, they wanted to buff melee abilities somewhat. For ranged abilities that were used somewhat, like Split Arrow, they got 10% as well. And just I moved out any of the numbers just from column wise from anything that was nerfed because of more of a rework going on. So basically, you can kind of see across the board, okay, basically every gem in the game got 25% more damage. Again, there are some exceptions. Seismic Trap got a bigger buff. Abilities that are more of movement abilities like Blade Flurry and Charge Dash are only 10% more. Again, bow skills didn't get quite as big a buffs as elsewhere. I think their support gems got less nerfed from what I can recall. So there are a couple of outliers basically, but what this means is kind of, at a baseline, abilities, or at least underused abilities, are doing 25% more damage before being linked to any supports. This is actually really, really worth mentioning, because this kind of flattens the power trough here somewhat, right? If Blade Vortex gets no buffs and Blade Blast gets no damage buffs, and I mean those changes are much bigger, but everything else goes up by 25%. Okay, they have closed the gap between the two. So simultaneously, grinding gear are reducing power creep by nerfing six links by a lot, which is generally true, but simultaneously bringing up the low end. And so it's worth mentioning that when they're talking about how Act 1 monsters have a lot more health and, the early game fights are going to be tougher, and by the way, nothing in Act 2 and Act 3 and Act 4 are any tougher, generally speaking, it's like, well, it's worth pointing out that, like, hey, if you're going to use, a lightning spire trap, well, it's 25% more damage than before. And even though, like, your first two links, have 10% less damage than before, well, that's only going to roughly compensate for the 25% more damage lightning spire trap got, meaning that you didn't actually get weaker in the early game. And that's worth pointing out, right? That these nerfs actually mean a lot more later on. So just kind of real quick data analysis, of all the abilities that it didn't take out as objectively just nerfs, and taking out things like Spectral Shield Throw, where it's not really twice as good because they modified the actual ability itself. Abilities got buffed, mostly between 9 and 40%. The vast majority of abilities just simply got 25% more damage. So for most analysis, we're going to be talking about the fact that, okay, yeah, we got 25% more damage. This exact same information is written in a different format. That, for basically every underused gem, it got 25% more damage on the baseline. And so now we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, how much were we using, I think Ancestral Protector it's called, like, the AoE one, how much we're using things like multi-strike. Okay, multi-strike actually got, strictly nerfed, but, if you're using bow skills with things like chain, like, okay, well, those didn't lose as much, outside of things like gem quality. So, right, it's a bit more complex. So now we go over to, where the big nerfs really are, which is the support gem damage multipliers. And in some of these cases, the nerfs are not very big, right? Like, added fire damage is only 3% less damage than before. That's how the math works out, by the way. Going from 44% more damage to 39% more damage is really functionally a, 3%, I guess, 3.5% roughly, less damage multiplier. And so this is the table. This is the table of every single support gem that got modified in some way. Nightblade got buffed for actually excising it from this analysis because it's a different multi thing. Obviously, sources of dot multi are additive with one another, so it's not going to be part of this analysis. But we can see that, okay, yes, indeed, a lot of support gems got nerfed, but there are really, really differing numbers here, right? Again, we're taking out things that are actually buffs, like things like Nightblade, but you can actually get some pretty useful information by looking at this analysis. We'll say, okay, well, yeah, some support gems got nerfed actually as much as 20% damage cut off, but some support gems got nerfed as much as 2% damage cut off. And even in the middle, like, we are really clustering around 10% off, but there are some differences. Not to mention the, dozens of support gems that got absolutely zero chains, like Fork and Chain and whatnot. So, some of that stuff is out there where it didn't take any damage off at all. And that's worth mentioning, right? Now, there are some things that are double dipped. Some of these can't be. I don't believe you can have max energy shield while also leeching energy shield. If that is possible, then this is obviously a bigger deal than each individual line says. The Vile Toxins one, like, this is the more dot damage and this is the more hit damage. So you're usually only using one of the two, but theoretically you might use both. And so Vile Toxins is actually more nerfed than you might think. That's a possibility there. But yeah, Vile Toxins really, really, really got hit for poison builds. And then, close combat, right? It might be another one where, maybe it's possible that somehow you actually get a double dip nerf here. So this is not like a completely perfect analysis, but it's going to get you in a pretty good spot for it. So what this means is we can use these numbers and do some more analysis. So basically what this means is, okay, what if we're on a 2-link, right? And we're using, the most nerfed thing ever. We're on a 2-link, Vile Toxins, just for dot damage. Okay, well, yeah, it's going to hurt really, really badly. And to be clear, like, this is not actually really very sophisticated analysis because there aren't enough gems that actually have an 20% damage nerf, where this is not really a reasonable column to care about. But okay, if we're on a 1-link, if we're on a, if we have one support, right, it's how many support links we have. So if we're on a 2-link here, if we're on a 3-link, a 4-link, a 5-link, a 6-link, and if we get a pseudo 6-link, right, if we, our helmet gives us, level whatever minion damage, okay, well, that's gonna be part of this analysis, right? So, 6-links exist. I know technically 7-links exist as well, but, like, they didn't nerf pseudo empower, so we're not going down that road right now. The socket of gems have +3 to crit chance, like, that didn't go anywhere, right? That didn't get nerfed, so, like, the 7-links aren't really getting touched here, right? But in a world where, like, yeah, okay, supported by level 20 minion damage, that is a real gem link, that is actually part of the nerfs here. Okay, we talk about that. So in my mind, we're going as far as pseudo 7-links, and that's actually reasonable analysis. Again, I think the minimum can mostly be cut out. I also think the maximum can mostly be cut out as well. That said, again, it's really worth pointing out, there are plenty of skill setups where the gem you're using like Pierce or Chain or whatever, doesn't actually have a nerf attached. So with that in mind, think about what your 6 link is and be like, oh, actually, I'm running Chain. So I'm really on a 5 link. Like, kind of do that sort of mental picture for yourself. We can kind of go through this. Okay. So, for the most part, though, as we said, yeah, most gems, right, got about 10% damage off, which means we're really looking at this set of data here. And again, for most players, we're looking at maybe a 4 link for clear, a 6 link for boss DPS, maybe a 5 link for boss DPS if we don't switch the gem out and Chain is still on or something. Or again, there's a relevant, gem that isn't getting nerfed very heavily. Again, things like, added fire damage is only nerfed by 3%. So again, it is a somewhat unsophisticated uh, a bit of math, but let's talk about the fact that, okay, well, GGG didn't really lie, right? For average 6 links, we in fact lost 40% of our damage. Like, this is true. If we're using 5 damage links and, we're not using a newly buffed skill to change that math around, well, then indeed, yeah, Chris Wilson said you're going to do about 40% less damage, and that is true. And if you're using a 4 link, and the nerfs aren't quite as bad, or you're using a bunch of support gems, yeah, the nerfs are more like 19%. Now, again, a 4 link is not realistic for everyone, but hey, let's be clear, right? Most people get into maps on a 5 link, so okay, yeah, you're only down by 34% as much damage. That's still a pretty meaningful nerf. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to pawn this off as buffs, but like, okay, yeah, for a realistic, percentage of the player base, these nerfs aren't nearly as large. It's to the tune of 19 to 34% as they scale up into maps and try to find the relevant 4 links for their builds. So okay, sure, that's where the numbers lie, and yeah, this seems about appropriate. So let's talk about again. Let's now round in or roll in the damage numbers a bit more. So the first thing to talk about is the fact that we had this analysis over here over how much base damage our abilities really gain, how much damage our gems really gain, and realistically they mostly gain 25%. But hey, some got as little as 9% for those who got buffed. Obviously, some are unbuffed entirely, and some got as much as 40% more damage for things like Seismic Trap, which hey, maybe is actually good, probably not, but whatever, right? But this is kind of the world we're living in, right? The base abilities are either unchanged or one of these numbers, so we can use that and actually do some decent analysis. Okay, well, if we're on a median 6 link. Down here, it's like, oh, yeah, if we have a relatively buffed skill, because a lot of skills got buffed, we actually only deal 25% less damage, right? If we're Blade Vortex, we do 40% less damage. If we're, Lightning Spire Trap, then yeah, it's 25% less damage. Now, yes, this is still 25% less damage to play Lightning Trap before and after the patch. Lightning Trap is still objectively weaker, but subjectively stronger. Lightning Spire Trap is, yeah, whatever. If you get really excited, like you're playing Seismic Trap, okay, and your support gems weren't nerfed very heavily, then you're actually the same, right? Like, Seismic Trap is as good as before. Is that going to feel good? Probably not. But like, hey, by the way, right? Like, this is still somewhat true in terms of build diversity. They did, in fact, close the gap somewhat. And again, we might pretty realistically have ourselves in a situation where we're running 1 link of Chain or something. So a very real scenario is this point right here where our ability got buffed by 25%, because a lot of abilities got buffed by 25%. We're running at least one utility slot, and okay, our damage is only down 17%. Now we're still down 17% off of the non-meta build from before, but the nerf is less severe than the other stuff. And then if you have 2 utility slots, or it's 1 utility slot and you're only on a 5 link, you're down 8%. And if using specifically Seismic Trap, you're actually stronger. So, worth noting that some of this stuff really did get okay. Right? I mean, you get 4 links from Act 3, eventually you get into an Act 5, but like, okay, our damage really isn't that far off for any, generically buffed ability using average nerfed supports. Like, this isn't truly horrible. It is objectively a nerf. I'm not trying to sell it anything else, but it is not super sky is falling. This is actually, making up some of the ground because, some of the gems we're going to be using are indeed going to do 25% more damage than the baseline. And as we get, 4 or 5 linked, 3 or 4 linked supports, a 4 or 5 link overall, the nerf is not quite so heavy, but yes, still definitely relevant. The final thing we're going to do some quick numbers on are the mana multipliers. I've seen all the memes on Reddit, people saying that, just the mana cost is going to be way too high. It's going to be basically untenable to do almost anything. Don't mind the red versus green. Saying buff versus nerf, this is just the same exact thing of like, look, whatever the midpoint of these changes are, that's what white is. Less than that is going to be red. More than that is going to be green. So, bleed went up by 27% mana cost, so it's green because the number is higher. I realize in all these cases, lower means less damage and green means more damage. Yeah, this is not what this is doing here. Forgive me for the numbers being slightly confusing. But we can again scroll through all of it. Obviously, we have pretty important highlights for things like cast on crit and cast on damage taken. Like these are, very notable exceptions to the rule. Cast when channeling, Archmage, these are all, really standing outside and are kind of special. But I want to note a couple quick points in the analysis here. So basically, mind skills. Okay, so second wind is special. It's 60% more mana, whatever. But all of the mind skills went from 30% to 50% mana multiplier. And so you kind of, in some cases, want to remove them from the analysis. I sort of functionally did in some of these cases, like if we drop things off the table, basically we used 136% as the next real baseline mana cost. And again, it's worth pointing out that outside of using again things like Blast Chain Mine, there aren't a lot of 136% mana cost changes, right? There's not a lot of things in the same tier as Swift Brand where it got a substantially higher mana cost. So once again, we're really, really centered around the fact that costs really only increased about 10% across the board. So our support gems, our damage support gems, indeed give us 10% less damage, and they cost about 10% more mana. And it's really clustered around that quite a bit. Obviously, again, we have some of them who are actually significantly buffed. So if you're using minion life and minion speed, it's actually just a lower cost overall. There's not a ton of them, right? But they do exist. GMP, right, has a lower mana cost, whatnot. So again, archers got a little bit left off the hook here. Or if you're using GMP Fireball and stuff, then great, here you go. That's how it's going to work for you. But again, we can do pretty obvious stuff here. We're going to mostly look at using 5 support links, aka a 6 link overall, and saying, look, if we're using the median value here on a 6 link, our costs are only up by about 50%. And you can kind of pause and stare at the data table as long as you want, but at the end of the day, like, our costs went up about 50%. And if we're not going to just follow the exact same meta build as the previous league, our damage is down, 25 or 17%. Are these nerfs? Absolutely. Are there other things going on like flasks and ascendancies and ailment immunity and whatnot? Absolutely. These things are all relevant, right? Like, in no way was this not a powered down patch for players. But in realistic scenarios where we're looking at average builds, yeah. If you're going to try some new stuff and, assume that maybe even the new gems are on that power level, then yeah, our damage is down by more like 20%, which is what Chris Wilson said. Our mana costs are only up about 45 to 50%, which, wasn't stated outright, but like these are not really absurd mana costs. And that's the numbers. I want to point that out there because I think people having the information so that they can make their own determinations, I think is useful. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.